This series of Lunchtime Conversations intends to capture insights from some of society's thought leaders in the very strange times we live in. 11th of May, and here in the UK, we're just beginning to consider how to plan for recovery, whatever form that's going to take. Part of my role at Warwick University is to make sure our education programmes remain relevant and continue to serve the needs of society. To do this, it's important to be part of the research and industry community. The people I'm going to speak to in this series form my professional network, and I rely on them to inform and help steer our educational offerings. We have seen seismic shifts in all areas of life. The extraordinarily pervasive nature of COVID-19 will have lasting effects. To talk about some of these with me today, I have Dave Gordon, the Senior Vice President of Rolls-Royce UK and the Chairman of Rolls-Royce Heritage Trust. So welcome to lunch.
Thanks very much, Marion. Lovely to be here.
We first met about 10 years ago now, when I began developing the Service Management and Design MSc.
That's right.
From initially steering the programme, you very kindly agreed, or at least you allowed yourself to be persuaded, to lecture to our students. And I mean, I can't tell you, to hear directly from an industry leader is so valuable at all sorts of levels.
Well, so, it's been huge. It's been huge fun, Mary, and I'm just, I'm slightly taken aback with it. It's been 10 years, but and the world has moved on, and clearly it's moved on a lot in the last 10 weeks as well. But it's been great fun to do, and I get a huge kick out of speaking to the future generations as well, and seeing where their heads are at, and hopefully in a little way shaping where they might take themselves as well. So it's been good fun.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The students really love having you coming to speak to them. So I guess to get some of your insights for now, what sort of moments or events stand out to you during the course of this pandemic, and how much they stand out to you, and maybe which ones stand out from the perspective of Rolls-Royce?
So I think the first piece was probably the cultural shift. So whilst I look after all of our UK customers, I work in a very much a global team. And so we'd already started to see some of the impact of COVID on other aspects of our business, particularly in the Far East. So we were starting to get an insight. And I think, but looking at it through a UK lens, the UK media was starting to pick up on it. And we were all starting to reflect on what it meant for us. And I would say there was a mixture of acceptance of what was coming from some parts of our business and denial in others, both on my side of the fence and I would argue in our customer community as well. So in the build-up to the announcement that we would formally move to lockdown, we'd started to extract teams from the site, and we'd started to think about working from home and how that might actually play out. And then I would say that it got accelerated very rapidly, and we went from a kind of proactive response phase to frankly quite a reactive, right, how are we going to deal with this here and now?
Yeah, yes, okay. And going forward, you know, the indicators, because you're a global company, you're going to see indication from all around the world at different times. You know, so what do you look for? What do you look for as your key indicators to help you see where things are changing? How do you react? Is it from your customers or from the news, or where do you take your information from?
So the primary source has come from World Health and Public Health England from a UK perspective, and obviously we have a huge presence in the US, we have a big presence in Germany and in places like Singapore. So in our key hubs, we look to government device first and foremost as a source of truth that we can then act on. And that also makes it very easy to have a conversation with our employees and with our wider teams and with our stakeholders, because they kind of understand that context. So whilst I would say we're aware of news reporting and we're sensitive to messaging that's coming out. We took it very, so we immediately stood up our crisis management team, of which I'm a part, and we do quite frequent rehearsing of scenarios to think about how we might respond and then get back. I can assure you that under none of those scenarios did we think about a global pandemic on the scale of this one, and I'd like to think I'm not alone in any major corporation in that. We'd sort of done similar type of things, but not on this scale. However, the good news was that we do have the mechanisms in place. And I think one of the real positives that's come out of this is just how more integrated and joined up we've been across the business, because we've had to respond in a coherent way. And as leaders, people look to us to give clarity, as we keep hearing in the news at the moment. And so having one message and a process and following that process has been really key. Now you, Mary, will find that absolutely hilarious, because you know me as someone who's quite innovative, and therefore somebody where I like to push the boundaries of the envelope, but I can also be very, very focused when I need to be. And when we're staring at something that has such a profound effect both on the well-being of our staff and also on the well-being of the business, it needed that real focus, not just from me by any means, but from leadership and the board above me and everything else. So having that focus. But it's interesting your point about global, and what we've seen is that we have teams in South Korea, for example, and they're now back in work. So as we sit here as human beings reflecting on when are we going to be released, and Mary, you're probably north of the border as I'm speaking to you, and you may
call Coventry north of the border.
Oh,
yes.
okay. I thought you might be back in the motherland of Scotland, but I was speaking to one of my Scottish colleagues who, on the face of it, is still under a more stringent regime than I am sitting here in England. But
are you back? I mean, that's a quick. Are you back at work? You know,
so very quickly that's a great question. So very quickly we said, right, who are our key workers? And we'd got a very clear steer from government at a very early stage that manufacturing was a priority, but critically defence would be a key priority for government. Both of them were given key worker status, but there was a recognition that clearly I work in the aerospace and defence business, and the aerospace business, as anyone will have seen on the news, has been decimated by a complete grounding of flying and everything else. And our civil aerospace business relies on aeroplanes flying. So the way that we've had to approach it from that side of the business is very, very different to how we've had to approach it from a defence perspective, where we got a steer early on that protecting homeland security and defence of our international interests would be a high priority for government all around the world, as you would imagine. And we needed to respond to that, but we needed to respond to it in a safe way. And the first way we did that was to identify those members of our workforce who absolutely had to be on site. And that's primarily factory workers and some of our office staff who are working on IT systems that weren't robust enough or for various reasons can't operate off-site. A lot of that we've managed to work through. So we've had to get creative in discovering that there's a huge amount we can do remotely and still protect sensitivities and everything else. So we've adapted. But yes, step one was who absolutely has to be in, and then how do we give them the assurance that they can work safely, and how do we give them the paperwork and everything else that allows them to get to the office and home and makes their families recognise that what they're doing is really important.
In a way, I guess, having thought that through previously, because you have to keep key workers at work, that kind of announcement that we got yesterday that people will go back to work, you've kind of already thought it through at least.
Well, we've certainly learned from it, and we did, in certain parts of the business, we did take a small time out to make sure that we could operate safely, and then got people back in again. But so, yeah, we have learnt from that experience. What we're now looking at is clearly where the focus went yesterday was from essential workers must, who can't work from home, go to work, which is still a significant part of our workforce, to certainly from a manufacturing perspective, if you can go to work, go to work. We've kind of seen that coming. I guess one of the advantages of media interest, even though some of it is self-creation in the absence of information, is we'd already started to do some what if scenarios around how might we get our workforce back. And we will, it won't be a surprise to know that in an agile environment in which a lot of our people work, certainly office based, you cannot get everyone back and do social distancing. But what we've also discovered, which I think is something we're going to take into our broader business model, is, do you know what? Actually, we don't actually need everyone in the office, and there's been some real positives to people not being there, which I'm very happy to discuss. But so we've been actively thinking about how do we get people back safely, and where should our priority be for those folks. But as part of that process, we are doing and do they need to be there test.
Yes.
And now there's no doubt from a well-being and mental health perspective that prolonged periods of exposure to MS Teams, Zoom, and shouting at people over your barking dog or whatever, as entertaining as it is, and as frankly as insightful it is, because I've learned so much about my team from connecting to them in their home environment in a really positive way. But it's also very intrusive, and it does blur the boundary between work and your personal time, and we're really sensitive to that, and it's clearly having its toll more on some people than others. So there's a whole load of things that we're going to have to think about in that shift back. But we've got ourselves a bit more time, because really what yesterday's announcement said is, yeah, if you can get back, please do. But as I say, most of the people who could be working were working. We had, in some parts of our business, we did furlough a significant number of staff, because with the load falling off, it made no sense for them to be there. But by no means did we furlough everyone, by no means at all. So part of our focus will be how we make that side of things work, having learned everything we now know about social distancing, use of PPE, access to PPE, and what our customers expect of us, and how we then apply that in a global context as well.
Yeah, one of the things, I mean, from working with you over these years, or catching up with you over these years, the language that you used before about service contract and contracting for risk was something that really stuck with me as a way to understand a service model where you can buy something and own it, but you carry the risk of looking after it, or you can move to a more service-oriented contract, and Rolls-Royce will keep hold of the risk, but for that you're going to have a longer-term service agreement. And risk seems to be something that we are running from now, with the idea of resilience, and to see what can go wrong when it goes wrong, and how badly wrong it can go. Do you think that's going to have implications on your customers' attitudes towards these contracts, or their appetite for having risk or not having risk? Do you see? Can you foretell, or is that going to be listen very carefully as time goes on?
No, I think it's already having an impact, because as I'm in the upside of my world is I'm probably busier than ever. And I think it's the curiosity of these times. I do stuff to create downtime, but I'm finding I'm very, very busy because of the new way that we're doing work. But one aspect of that is we continue to negotiate for new business, which is obviously great. And some of that's actually in growing new offerings and discussing with customers how we might do that. What I have seen, Mary, is a bit of a shift. So yeah, our main engagement's been on innovation in services and more pushing that risk transfer. Although ironically, with a customer who was becoming less and less, I would argue, willing to pay for that risk because in their view, it was, something that we maybe knew how to do. I think what this environment has exposed is risk is very real, and you need to have some kind of contingency around it, whether it's balancing your portfolio or bringing different approaches. And yeah, absolutely, as I look to negotiate new deals and stuff, we will be reflecting on the new environment and how you can responsibly manage some of that. But interestingly as well, one of the opportunities is that there's no doubt that the sector I work in is an area where we can restart the economy. And I think it's quite interesting looking some of the modelling that people like the Bank of England are doing, where, yeah, we've seen this enormous trough, and anyone who follows the FTSE or whatever will have seen it very, very graphically illustrated. And there are a whole raft of scenarios out there, but one of them sees a swifter recovery than we might normally see in this kind of depression or whatever. And part of that is because of the ability of industries like mine to restart, assuming the demand is there, and we can manage resilience in the supply chain. So what we are seeing is a renewed appetite particularly from our government customers to have very serious conversations about what else can we do, because they see us playing a vital part in that national recovery effort that's key if we're going to avoid a catastrophic sort of economic impact downstream. So yeah, I think it's all going to change. I think I talk to a lot of strategy colleagues, M&A type folks and stuff across the industry globally, quite a lot now. And I think we're all happy to have a conversation because nobody's got the right answer and nobody's being cute about it. It's just trying to understand how we're all seeing things, how we're looking at mega trends, and where can we play in that in a constructive way, really.
Yes, okay. Well, thank you. I've got a couple of questions came in from some folks, so I just checking to make sure I feel like we've got them answered. I think Akash Balur, I think he was looking for changes. I think you've addressed that. I think Tim as well, he's got his answer there for some of maybe your challenges for getting people, if we are going to transition the business model, if that's what you're going to do as Rolls-Royce, then what do you think will be the big challenges if you have to reinvent? Is it the same? Do you have to re-educate your customers, or is there an appetite, a greater appetite for offerings now?
Yeah, I mean, I think re-educate. I'm a big fan, as you know, of the co-create route, but part of that is taking them on the journey, I guess, and there's certainly an appetite for that. So I think we're re-educating each other on what does this really mean, and how will it impact us, and how can we, and a recognition that yes, we want to innovate, and yes, we want to drive growth, but actually we also know our customers are going to be hit by a really big challenge in terms of public finance and everything else. So how does that work?
Well, you manage the way will you change the way you manage your supply chain on the other side of that? Because I guess you're at greater risk too.
So I think I'm going to answer that generically rather than for us. But I think what we're going to see in terms of trends is there's a really interesting conundrum around globalization versus localization, and use of domestic supply chains versus international. And as we were reacting initially to the challenge, and some of our supply chain was in places like China that was experiencing the initial impacts, and so clearly we looked to respond to that. And one of the areas we were originally going to respond was in Italy, for example. And not long after that, Italy got impacted. And this really started, and I think everyone was the same. We started looking at resilience in supply chain and how we deal with moving stuff around, and how we deal with these very locally managed situations in terms of which places are open and which aren't. So I think going forward, as we look to manage risk, as you talked about, you know, part of that's a conversation, but not just with customers, with our supply chain as well, and understanding how that's going to affect their world. And some of them are going to be impacted by, you know, the effects of the downturn in some sectors and not in others. And so I think there's a whole conversation that's going to be had there, Mary. But I think one of the interesting academic debates is going to be about, you know, there's been a huge shift towards low-cost sourcing, you know, as I say, globalization and diversification of your base and everything else. And there'll be an enthusiasm to pull some of that back in again. And
Yeah, and I've got to say, I mean, obviously this is a crisis. Some of the challenges and the conversations and the discussions that it's throwing up in the areas that I've been working in academically, and I'm delighted that our students are able to get in there, equip some background knowledge to help consider some of these well, these issues, you know, these big implications, and but to have a background knowledge to be able to engage with it, to try to understand, to determine what might be implications if they choose one direction or another. And I mean, it's a very interesting space. It's a very interesting space to think about just now. So
I think it is anywhere, and I think, yeah, it's got to be an academic's dream, really. And I'm probably a closet kind of enthusiast for theorizing on some of these things as well. I'm sure we've birthed a million PhDs on the back of this topic.
yeah.
I mean, even if you look at the way that the medical environment's changing, as I say, we are very, very. I know it's a cliche to be driven by the science, but we are driven by the science when it comes to how we manage the health and safety of our people. None more so than now, and it actually makes it really easy because there is a huge amount of guidance out there, and combined with common sense, and we involve our sort of representatives in the conversation. We've done that from day one, actually. It's been a real positive having our union colleagues working alongside us, and they bring real insight and solutions. So that's been fun. But actually, yeah, if you look at the medical piece, their knowledge is developing every day, their data's developing. I suspect some of the fairly blunt instruments that we've used to deal with this are going to get more nuanced, as we're already seeing, which then brings a clamour for clarity. But that will only come as we understand the data. But yeah, there's a rich amount of data that we can look at. And just in the same way as I see different nations looking at each other's behaviours and seeing what works and what doesn't work, then obviously from an industry point of view, in a very constructive way, we'll be doing that as well. And we'll see what approaches seem to be working and what aren't, and how does it impact our various strategies. You know, where does digital play in this brand new world? Where does the whole green sustainable bit? I think this will sound bizarre coming from someone in the aviation industry, but I think we've all, having looked at the skies and seen nothing in it, maybe the global need to address some of the challenge around environmental issues has really had a light shone on it in a positive way. We'd already moved very big time into starting to think about electric and hybrid electric solutions, for example, and how you use sort of zero carbon approaches, be they, as I say, hydrogen or nuclear power of different sorts and all the rest of it. So it's allowing us to think about all of those things very creatively. And a number of those aspects have genuine solutions that, again, maybe it's accelerated those opportunities ahead of where we expected to be, which personally I think is fantastic, because we started that conversation. But in certain countries it was not landing. And I think it will start, I think it will start to land. And I see you open this up very kindly with a reference to thought leadership, but I think the UK in particular is a real thought leader in some of this space. And I'm keen to find the opportunities in this crisis, notwithstanding the fact that we take the challenges and the impacts really seriously as well.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for sharing those insights. Now, I think this is a good place to stop our conversation with a bit of blue sky thinking with your lovely blue skies in the background here. So I'm very aware of how you've taken to art through this pandemic, and I love that picture behind you. I think it's really great. It's a really great for the VE Day celebrations. It's lovely. It's great. So anyway, thank you for sharing these insights. For me, you know that I love that you are so generous in your thoughts and sharing, and that I do use this to help inform what we put into our programs and what direction to take our educational offerings.
Right.
For our students who are listening to this is so valuable for them because they can pick this up to help inform their research and use it as secondary data to help inform specifically their research or just to inform them going forward. And from the Greater Warwick community, I think it's just great to be able to have the opportunity to see somebody in your position, because you hold two really powerful positions, and it's really nice just to meet the person. So thank you very much. If anybody listening to this would like to and hear more from Dave, then please just contact me directly. My details are on Warwick website, and I'll pass them on to Dave. If you're watching this on YouTube, there's a link on the closing slide, and of course the series is going to be made into a podcast as well, so you can hear Dave's thoughts from wherever you are, and hopefully when we go back to a little bit of out and about and wandering around with earphones in. So thank you very much indeed, Dave, and I guess hopefully I look forward very much to speaking to you soon.
Well, and thank you very much to you as well, Mary. And in this strange world we live in, I can't resist also noting that about 20 metres away is there soon to be Warwick alumnus as my daughter graduates, and
congratulations to her.
And thrashes away on her dissertation, which may resonate with some of the viewers as well. So yeah, I look forward to meeting people firsthand and continuing the conversation. But in the meantime, yeah, absolutely. If people want to ask questions, I always look forward to that because it helps our insights. And thanks for the time.
Yeah, thank you.